Welcome to part 2 of the Spring ISD Literacy Applied Power Hour online professional development series. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. And if you joined me for part 1, welcome back. Either way, we are happy that you have decided to join us on this journey to learn and add to your instructional tool belt best practices to include or to increase literacy instruction in your classroom. In today's session, we will explore how the use of purposefully planned discourse or discussion in any given classroom, in any given content, and/or in any given course will support literacy progress monitoring. As we work to ensure alignment to the goals, mission, and values of the district, this module will work to support you in your efforts to reach every scholar's cognitive needs, engaging them and strengthening your skill set as a high-performing instructional leader. The following are a few domains you may decide to note as you check off your goals for this school year or organize and record your professional development sessions. At the close of this 3-part series, should you partake in all 3 sessions, you will walk away being strengthened in domains 1, the planning of meaningful activities to support embedding literacy instruction and reaching scholar mastery, domain 2, achieving expectations, increasing discourse in the classroom, and responding to the needs of scholars to push them towards mastery, and monitoring and adjusting lessons based on the data collected, and domain 3, developing a classroom culture conducive to reading, writing, and active discussions. So be sure to return to all 3 sessions. As we go through this session, we want to be aware of our digital community norms. Please ensure you are in an area where you are able to be present and distraction-free. Feel free to take frequent breaks should you need to refocus your concentration on the material being presented. If at any time you have questions or concerns, we welcome you to reach out to us and share those concerns so we can address any issues you may have with the implementation. My contact information can be found in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and will be shared again at the close of the session. I await any questions or concerns you may have as you work through this module. And finally, should you find any information noteworthy, please capture the new knowledge as needed in a place where you can easily and readily retrieve it at a later date. It is important for everyone participating to hear the term theory of action. Our theory of action team is a checks and balance system in place to hold people accountable for what programs are being implemented, what curriculum is being designed, what instructional items are being purchased, what assessments are mandatory, and, you're here, what effective professional developments look like. Scholars are the why, and everyone is held to a high standard to ensure scholar success is the priority. Ensuring that we are not only lesson planning, but perfecting the process of lesson planning helps us to ensure we are not only implementing, but implementing with fidelity, which in turn results in increased scholar achievement. The following are learning goals for this series. We cannot stress enough how attending all 3 sessions will prove to be beneficial in your instructional practice to close literacy instructional gaps and support increased scholar achievement in your courses. Today and the remaining session will support efforts in incorporating literacy in all contents in all courses
In particular, in this session, we will spend time examining the following in the next few moments that I have with you as we learn and grow together. We will create prompting questions to encourage scholar discussion. We will monitor scholar understanding by creating a discussion tracking form. And we will plan a reteach activity, or at least think about a reteach activity based on strategies that will engage scholars with the content. So let's get started. How can discussion between scholars be used as a way to monitor scholar learning? What does effective discussion look like? I want you to keep these questions in mind as we go through our session, and particularly as you complete our opening activity. In the yellow course discussion folder, you will find your opening activity entitled The Role of Literacy in Discussion. Once I go over the discussion expectations, you will go over to the yellow course discussion folder in part 2 of this course and complete the Role of Literacy in Discussion task. When you click on the Role of Literacy in Discussion task, you will notice an attachment. You will read the excerpt in the attachment and respond in the discussion box the answers to the 4 questions that are posed. So, at this time, please pause your video and complete the Role of Literacy in Discussion task only. Once you have made your post, come on back over to resume the video and continue in the learning. See you in a bit. All right, welcome back. So now that you have completed your discussion, let's review. A few potential answers to the reflection questions should have been: the teacher did a good job of using academic language in her questions and responses to the scholars. The teacher did the majority, however, of the talking in the discussion. The questions asked were very close-ended and only required a one-word answer. Because of the high volume of academic language used in the questions, the scholars may have been confused by what the teacher was asking. While the teacher was able to determine that scholars needed to review the information, she would not be able to truly pinpoint exactly how many scholars were confused about the life cycle of insects. Instead, the teacher could start by asking an open-ended question. For example, what can you tell me about the life cycle of an insect, Malik? She would then encourage scholars to add on and develop Malik's answers to get a better idea of each scholar's thinking and understanding of what the life cycle looks like. Through the course of our session, we'll learn and practice many of these tactics, or if you don't practice on your own, you'll have some instructional strategies and tools to add to your tool belt to take away on how you can improve the role of discussion in literacy in your content class or in your elective class. How many of you have attended the Habits of Discussion Professional Development? If you have attended it, what do you remember about habits of discussion from previous trainings that you have attended? Take a few seconds to reflect and think back on whatever you remember. Well, let's quickly refresh our memories. I know many of us have slept since then. So, habits of discussion includes 4 components. The first one is discussion fundamentals. Discussion fundamentals are the basic skills scholars should have when participating in a discussion. It includes tracking the speaker, speaking loud enough to be heard by everyone in the discussion, and referring to their classmates by name. For example, I agree with Christopher, but I also think. The second is follow-on prompting. Follow-on prompting is pushing scholars to respond to another scholar's answer, using phrases like, James, can you add on to what David said? Or, Brianna, how do you feel about Charlie's answer? These prompts encourage scholars to be engaged and always listening to their peers so that they are prepared to respond with their own thoughts. The third, sentence starters. Sentence starters are a way to transition from one scholar's comment to the next scholar's response. They could include, I understand, and I would like to add, or that makes sense because. The last is discussion management.
Discussion management is the teacher's ability to ensure that the development of ideas and the direction of the conversation are productive. Look out for scholars who shift the focus to something unrelated or those that become long-winded and off-topic in their answers. So you may begin to think or wonder, how do I effectively employ discussions in my respective course to monitor progress or achievement? Let's take a few moments to dive into questions that drive academic conversations. In order to have a productive discussion, you need to carefully plan the questions you will ask. You can't simply walk into the class and off the dome create and ask those high-level questions all the time. You have to purposefully plan them. While low-level questions are great in some cases, like a quick check for understanding, high-level questions are necessary to drive an in-depth scholar discussion. Low-level questions, or convergent questions, are those that typically only have one correct answer or only require a simple, short answer. They can usually be answered by one or two scholars. However, high-level questions, or divergent questions, are more open-ended. They can be answered in a variety of ways and tend to require scholars to show their thinking process with more detailed answers. Currently on your screen are two different questions about equivalent fractions. One of them is a high-level question, and another one is a low-level question. Take a few seconds to identify which in your head is the high-level question. You're going to show me a thumbs up, and which is a low-level question, and you're going to show me a thumbs down. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First question, how would you explain equivalent fractions to someone who has never learned about them before? Come on, participate with me. Give me a thumbs up if you think it's a high-level question. Give me a thumbs down if you think it's a low-level question. Go. Alrighty, thank you for those of you that participated. Our second question, would 1/4 and 3/8 be considered equivalent fractions? Show me a thumbs up if you think it's a high-level question. Show me a thumbs down if you think it's a low-level question. Go. Thank you again for those of you that participated. So let's check our answers. I know I have some extremely high-performing, high-achieving scholars in my audience today. So I know without a doubt you said the first one was a high-level question and the second one was a low-level question. So thank you all again for your virtual participation. I appreciate it. So let me push your thinking. Remember, we're thinking about and we're learning how the use of questions can drive our academic conversations, right? So, which question do you think will lead to a more effective scholar discussion and why? Think about it. Shout it to me. Alrighty, so I without a doubt again think that you all responded with the correct answer and you said the first question. Of course, the first question, the high-level question, as it invites and pushes scholars to think through a conversation about the content. In this example, scholars have to show their comprehension or knowledge of the concept. This is because they must transfer their learning to another learner, right? If you joined me in part 1, we talked briefly on how discourse and conversations can prove to be a true test of mastery. Think about a teaks or skill or skills where scholars struggle to grasp, or even an assignment that you assigned or task they were expected to complete, but they struggled through. How might the incorporation of discussion had been used to monitor or evaluate their progress in accomplishing the task at hand? I want you to think about how might, if I had incorporated meaningful academic conversations and academic discussions in my class, would I have been able to track or notice where my scholars were struggling and where my scholars were achieving and high performing? And then as the teacher of record, I would have been able to intervene on those struggles or push their thinking and learning a little bit further if they had mastered it. As we continue to go through the rest of today's course, or however long it takes you to complete this course, I want you to think about this question and those that I posed previously in the session. We're thinking about how can I purposefully embed academic conversations and high and some low-level questions in my classes daily to push discussion and ultimately to push engage mastery.
So now let's practice some of the learning that we've experienced thus far. In this first activity, you will have the opportunity to create high-level questions that can be used to prompt a rich academic discussion. You will first choose a text from the provided options in the Black Course Resources folder. You will read the text and write 2 prompting questions to guide scholars in rich academic conversations. Think about the questions that I posed earlier in the session. Remember, you want those high-level, rich questions. And 3, you will write 3 general, universal prompts that would encourage a scholar to respond to the previous scholar's answer. So, to recap, you will need to select a reading passage or text based on the content area you are most comfortable with. There are passages and texts for each 4 of our content areas: math, ELA, social studies, and science. You will also notice that there are also texts for our non-content or our elective courses as well. Again, these texts can be found in the course resources folder that is black. The activity that you will, or the activity handout that you will need to complete this assignment can be found in the blue course assignments folder. In that blue course assignments folder, you will notice a folder that is titled Activity 1 and a folder that is entitled Activity 2. Remember, right now we're focusing on Activity 1, so be sure to open the Activity 1 folder to complete this activity. The average time to complete this activity is about 10 minutes. However, take as long as you need to complete the assignment to the best of your ability, applying everything that we've learned thus far. So, at this time, I will allow you to please pause your video and complete the Activity 1 assignment on high-level questioning. Once you have completed and submitted the assignment, come on back, resume the video, and continue in the learning. See you in a bit. Welcome back to the learning. It is important to note, in order to determine how well scholars are understanding the content they have read, you must create a way to listen to their thinking and track their progress. Join me in reviewing the information displayed on your screen. What are the main concepts scholars should know after reading the text? Are scholars able to communicate their knowledge about what they read? What should an exemplar scholar answer sound like? What would a developing scholar answer sound like? And how can you keep track of the progress scholars are making in communicating their understanding of a text? This data will help you to keep track of scholar progress in both the content they are reading as well as their ability to communicate their understanding. So, to build on tracking scholar understanding, we incorporate discussion in our classrooms, right? Then what? I'm pretty sure you've been thinking, or maybe you haven't. We've talked all this time about incorporating discussions in the classroom, but then what? How do I use the conversations that my scholars are having to teach or to do the next thing? What data am I collecting, and how am I going to track that data, or what even is the data, right? Well, let's talk about it. So the scholar's role in discussion is to talk about or engage in discussion on what they are doing, learning, reading, and studying, right? This is what they are doing. But what is what is your role as the teacher? Okay, so here we go. As scholars are discussing, you, the teacher, are documenting or tracking their understanding. How else will you know their individual progress, proficiency, mastery, or deficits, right? You have to track it. So here are a couple different examples of what a tracking form could look like. Keep these ideas in the forefront of your mind because remember, as we talked about in our goals at the beginning of the session, you are going to create your own tracking form. Okay, so first you have this tracker that is on your screen right now. It says discussion tracker equivalent fractions. With this example, you could write or type in your scholars' names, initials, or whatever coding system you might have for identifying your scholars. In the second, third, and fourth column, you notice expectations of the discussion. As you are walking around or popping into groups to confer with scholars, simply just check off what you heard if it was correct. You might denote an X if the answer or response was incorrect. You might even have an abbreviation such as NW for not witnessed or NO for not observed if you feel you might have missed that portion of discussion, but you don't necessarily want to penalize your students because, of course, you didn't hear it, right? With this example right here, our second example, similarly, you would write or type in your scholars' names, initials, or again, whatever coding system you might have for identifying your scholars. Notice in this example, however, there is one question that the teacher is looking to be answered. How would you explain equivalent fractions to someone who has never learned about them before? In this example, the teacher would simply listen for their differing levels of understanding and note where each scholar falls. This data would then support your small group, your pullouts, your enrichments, and or even your reteach lessons. Remember that these are not the only way you can track scholar understanding during a discussion. You need to create a data collection method that works best for you and your scholars. But as you see, here are two variations of what you could use or what you could consider to get yourself started. Okay, we've reached another practice opportunity to internalize the learning and ideas you will soon turn around in your classrooms, okay? In this activity, you will create a rough draft of your own tracking form. You can use ideas from the two examples that we previously just reviewed, or you can come up with your own unique form. The examples previously reviewed can be found in the Black Course Resources folder of this course. Black Course Resources folder. Before I release you, make sure again, as I mentioned previously, to keep in mind the information that we discussed. What should scholars know after reading the text? What would an exemplar scholar response sound like? How well are scholars able to communicate their understanding of the content that they have read? Okay, keep those three ideas in mind. In the Blue Courses Assignment folder, there is a handout in the Activity 2 folder for you to complete. That is where you are going to create your form for today's assignment. It is up to you, remember, it is up to you how you decide to create or complete this activity. There is a box in the center of that assignment, but feel free to delete that box if you don't need that box, or create a table or a tracker form within the box. Totally up to you. It on average should take you about 10 minutes to complete this form. However, if it takes longer, no worries, take as long as you need to. So at this time, I invite you to pause your screen, head over to Activity 2 in the blue folder to complete the discussion tracker activity. Once you have completed the discussion tracker assignment activity, I want you to make sure you submit it and then join me back again to continue in the learning. Assessing scholar misconceptions. So, once you have collected data on your discussion tracking form, you will need to analyze it to identify any scholar misconceptions or gaps in their understanding. This is where you will identify scholar progress in both the concepts they are currently learning and their ability to comprehend and discuss what they are reading. So, remember, we aren't just incorporating questioning just for the sake of incorporating questions, right? We are incorporating and planning purposeful questions to gauge scholar mastery and monitor their progress. Once we incorporate our questions and plan for our questions, we need to have a purposeful way of how we track whether our scholars are on target with how they are answering those questions. From there, we collect the data to figure out what is our next plan of action, or what is our plan of action for closing those instructional gaps or providing enrichment. So on your screen, notice the 3 bullets. It says first, or one of the things we want to do to assess scholar misconceptions are to look for trends in scholar answers and areas where growth may be needed. We want to look for trends in their answers in the areas where growth may be needed. We also want to analyze individual scholar progress to determine whether they are growing in the content knowledge. I have to say it again. We want to analyze individual scholar progress to determine whether they are growing in content knowledge. So, While in the first bullet, we may look individually, or we may look at the trends as a whole class or as a whole unit. In the second one, we are focusing solely on individual scholars. And last but not least, we want to identify scholar progress in reading comprehension and their ability to communicate their learning. So, are they able to fully comprehend the text at hand, the text that they are reading? And once they have internalized it, or if they are able to internalize it, are they able to communicate their learning to myself, the teacher, or you, the teacher, or are they able to communicate their learning to a peer? All of this information will lead you to your next step, which is to provide support to scholars where needed. Now we've reached the hour of, or the moment of reflection. What I want you to do is take a moment to think about a time you had to reteach a lesson to the whole class. Think about that instance where you purposefully planned for this, you went all out for this certain teach or skill, or maybe you didn't. You really taught your heart out, or really thought, okay, this lesson, my scholars, my students are really going to master, they're going to get it, right? But they didn't. And it wasn't just one student or two students or a group of students. It was the whole or majority of the class, right? Think about that time. I want you to think vividly about that time. To help you think about that moment or that time, I want you to reflect on those 5 questions that you see on your screen right now. 1, what lesson was it? 2, how did you know the entire class needed to reteach? What data was used to make this decision in your mind or out loud to say, okay, I need to either reteach it right now or tomorrow or whatever day, I'm going to have to come back and reteach this lesson. 3, how was the reteach lesson different from the original lesson? That's something we need to be mindful of, because sometimes we don't reteach the lesson differently. We just reteach it using the same materials, the same everything. And was that really a reteach? 4, were scholars successful after your reteach? I mean, in order for a reteach to have been successful, you had to be able to collect data that shows, okay, majority of my scholars are ready to move forward in the next skill. And then 5, how did this experience affect your planning for future lessons? Okay, so we're reflecting on these 5 questions. I am about to give you some time to go and reflect. But before I do that, I've been doing a little bit of talking while you should have been reflecting. So you see those 5 questions, go ahead and reflect on that moment. Take a couple of seconds to do that. So, to complete this assignment, you will need to mosey on over to the yellow folder that is titled Course Discussion. It's our Course Discussion folder. In that folder, you will find the task entitled Reflection. Once you get over there, you are going to, again, click on that discussion folder. You are going to work on the reflection task. So make sure you are in part 2 of the Literacy Applied. You're going to click on the yellow course discussion folder, and you are going to click on the task that says Reflection. You will notice these same 5 questions are posed in the discussion panel. I want you to be sure that you complete all 5 questions, okay? So, at this time, please pause your video and complete the 5 questions in the reflection task located in the yellow course discussions folder. Once you have made your post, resume the video and come on back to continue in the learning. See you soon. Now that you have collected data from scholar discussions and analyzed the data to identify gaps or misconceptions, it's time to plan for a reteach of the content. The way you structure your reteach will depend on many different factors. For example, what will your reteach focus be? How many scholars need a reteach? Will it be a whole class or a small group reteach perhaps? These details will need to be determined first. Once you have identified this information, you will need to create a plan for how you will teach the information for the second time. It is important that you create a plan that is different from the way you originally taught the lesson. On the screen, you will see 3 ideas for reteach strategies that may help your scholars who
who are still struggling. First, make it relevant. The first concept is to make it relevant. Relate the content the concept you are teaching to something they already know. For example, if they are struggling with the concept of fractions, relating it to slices of pizza may help them to visualize it better. 2, make it memorable. The second is to make it memorable. Find a way to engage scholars in an activity that creates an emotional tie to the content. This could be as simple as having fraction day, where everything you do in the class that day revolves around different fractions. Lastly, get scholars moving. The third is to get scholars moving. Research has shown that tying physical movement with learning helps the brain store information more readily. For example, singing a song about fractions that includes small movements or having scholars participate in a demonstration of equivalent fractions would both be ways to help scholars better understand and remember the concept. While all of these are great reteach strategies, they can also be used for initial instruction as well. So, while, again, to reiterate, you can use all of these, all three that I just mentioned that we just went over for reteach, this is a great way to initially teach your students by making content or concepts relevant, making content or concepts memorable, and getting scholars moving through the content and or concepts. And then, should you need to reteach, think about a different way to make it even more relevant, more memorable, and get them moving in a different manner. Our final activity will give you an opportunity to think about the process for creating a reteach activity based on one of the 3 strategies we just discussed. As you move forward in your instructional practices, I want you to adapt the principles you have learned over the course of this session. When preparing your reteach lesson, whether in whole class or small group, consider the 3 ideas from our pie chart. So, as we close, I want you to reflect on one of the 3 reteach strategies that you will plan to adopt first in a future reteach lesson. Jot it down in your planner, on a sticky note, or wherever you hold your planning ideas, and promise me, guys, that you will commit to using it in your future. I want to take the time to thank you for joining in and expanding your learning in literacy progress monitoring. I truly enjoyed everything that you contributed to the course in our virtual session. I want to remind you of a few items that you need to submit in order to gain credit for this course. First and foremost, at the beginning, we completed a discussion that was the role of discussion in literacy. So you should have submitted that discussion in our discussion forum. We also had another discussion, which was a reflection, so you want to make sure that you submitted that as well. You also had 2 assignments, Activity 1, high-level questioning, and Activity 2, discussion tracker. So please make sure you completed those and submitted it for me to review. Last but not least, there is an exit ticket and survey that I would love for you to take the time out to complete. After I receive your submission on the survey, that is when I will grant you full credit. So there are 5 things that you are doing: 2 discussions, 2 activities, and your exit ticket and survey. If you have any questions about submissions, what the expectation is, whatever the case may be, feel free to reach out to me. My email is on the screen, mbeene@springisd.org. And again, I want to remind you to stay tuned for the release of Part 3, Assessing Scholar Work Samples, Evaluating Growth. Just to throw in a shameless plug, please follow me on Twitter at BEE_necessary_, and feel free to tweet out anything that you learned or enjoyed from this session with hashtag #LitApply2. But wait, guys, there's more. I know I've already said this, but I can't help to say it one more time. Just a reminder, I mentioned this earlier, but we've purposefully planned all 3 sessions as a part of this wonderful series that builds on each other and ultimately connects. So while you didn't need part 2 for part 3 or part 1 for part 2, I highly recommend that you attend, and I hope that you have attended all 3 sessions. So since you're here, you might as well go ahead and think about signing up for part 3 to get the most benefit in your rollout and implementation. So again, please look for the announcement to